All right, clase. Now we're going to start talking about all of the grammar from this lesson. We're going to do an overview of everything that's in this lesson today, because you know that I'm going to be out of the classroom tomorrow. And I want you to be well prepared to be able to do exercises from the exercise packet and do some practice, maybe even using 2 Quizlet sets, one for vocabulary, one for conjugation of verbs in the preterite. So we've created 2 Quizlet sets for you, and then there's also just understanding an overview of the grammar. And you can see if you start out with me on page 160, that the top, like the file folder tab that's at the top of this grammar box says repaso in the preterite. And I'm not really sure whether all of this is review or not. But because we sometimes struggle with the preterite, I put a lot of things on the note sheet for you. Some things that maybe are not in the textbook. So I'd like to walk through the notes with you today. You can see it's a rather lengthy notes document, but it may be because I've added a few things to it that your textbook doesn't explicitly state, but that will really enhance your understanding of the lesson. So we're starting on page 160 with the preterite. And on the notes document it says the preterite tense tells what?
Actions that are begun or completed at a specific time.
Actions, well, now be careful, don't write all of that out. Actions that were already done or completed, but the way we usually state it is we use the verb to happen. So the preterite tells what happened. Okay? Straight up, the preterite tells what happened. And the preterite is often introduced with time markers, or in other words, expressions that point to a specific point in time. And then in your text, it gives you a list of those, and that's what I would like for you to write on that line. Ayer, anoche, este fin de semana, and el verano pasado. Now those aren't the only ones that are possible, right? Those are examples or models of what you could use as time markers. You could say esta mañana. Why could we say esta mañana and use the preterite? Because we've already covered most of the morning here. We've had, for me, I've been up since 5:30, so that's 4.5 hours of the morning that already passed for me. So we could even use esta mañana. Now we have to be careful because esta mañana could also be the present, and esta mañana could also be the future. So we have to be really careful with time markers, but these are almost super specific to the preterite. So then, the conjugation of regular verbs in the preterite. Now that's not in the box, but it's also really good for us to fill in this chart, right? So I assume that those of you who are in the classroom have already gotten it filled out because you don't need me. Nobody really needs me to do this, but let's go through it and practice. AR verbs, clase, yo, con acento, ¿sí? Tú, haste, él, ella, usted, o con acento, nosotros, nosotras, amos, vosotros, vosotras, astes, astes. It's identical to the to form, and then you add is to the end. That's really consistent throughout the preterite. For those of you who struggle with that vosotros form, the ending is identical to the to form, and then you add is to the end. Astes. No accent mark. Ellos, ellas, ustedes. Aron. Aron. All right. ERIR verbs. The preterite is more efficient in this way. They don't have separate endings, so this is good for us. That's probably the only thing that's good for us about the preterite because it is the most irregular tense of this language. Clase forma yo. Y con acento, tú, Iste, el, usted. Y yo, where's the accent mark? Over the O. Nosotros, nosotras. Imos, vosotros, vosotras. Istes, I'm glad for the confidence you just gave me that answer with, because that means that we're learning that little trick to use. Ellos, ellas, ustedes. Hiero. All right. Now, we know that there is a particular phrase. Now, this particular phrase I intended for you to write in the left-hand margin. And that particular phrase is often used with the following phrases. Oh, excuse me. I misspoke. Let me go back. The preterite is often used with the following phrases which mark the beginning of an event or a situation. What are the two phrases that your textbook points out as ones that mark the beginning of an event or a situation? The first one, al plus an infinitive. So something like, al llegar a casa, upon arriving home, al ver a sus amigos, upon seeing his friends, al comprar 10 hamburguesas en McDonald's, upon buying 10 hamburgers at McDonald's. Okay? All of those are, that al plus an infinitive translates to upon doing something. Okay? And then the other one, the other option, en cuanto. En cuanto translates as soon as. Now, many of you like to use tan pronto como, but a native speaker is more likely to use en cuanto plus the preterite when it is the preterite. Tan pronto como often is used with the present tense or the future, but en cuanto, and en cuanto can be used in those tenses as well, but if we're using the preterite, en cuanto is the best option for as soon as. En cuanto. Now, I left some space for you at the bottom of that sheet to write in some examples. You can use the ones from your textbook, but using the ones from your textbook is the easy way out. You're better than that. You examine the examples that are in the textbook, and then you formulate your own that demonstrate that you understand this topic. Now, I know some of you right now, I saw the smirks, I saw the snickers on your face. Snickers, not always a candy bar. The snickering that was going on out there because I said you don't just copy the ones from the book because you already had. Okay, I get that. But I want to encourage you to be better than that. I want to encourage you to make better use of your note-taking skills, because note-taking is supposed to be a thoughtful process. Note-taking is supposed to be a mindful process, and that means that not only are you just writing the information down, but you're processing the information at the same time. And if you process the information well, then you are owning the information for yourself. So instead of merely copying someone else's thoughts, process the information and apply it to make it your own. And come up with some other examples that illustrate that same point. Okay? I'm just challenging you to be a better student. Okay? Challenging you to make the information your own. You're great students, don't mistake me in that. But I want to help you do an emerald. I want to help you kick it up a notch. All right. Now, one of the major things that they review, and I believe that, first of all, I believe that point number 2 from the text, which is what we were just talking about with al plus an infinitive and in quanto. I think that was new information. That's how your textbook is kind of tricky. They put repaso or review at the top of something, and then they sneak something new in there that we don't know. Catches us off guard if we don't read it carefully. So the next point, number 3, is all about irregular stem preterites. Now your textbook does not call them that. In fact, only some textbooks call them that, but we have talked about these verbs many times in the past. But I included more than what your textbook put in because we have talked about them in the past. Let me remind you about some of the concepts that I've said about these verbs. And if you're in the classroom or if you're just listening to this lecture, you can go on and fill in the notes. But I want to remind you about some things we've said. Remember, the preterite is one of the most irregular tenses in this language. And so we have to have a way to sort and select and organize our knowledge to help us remember it better, because there are just so many different ways for verbs to be irregular in the preterite. And one such way is to talk about a subset of irregulars. If we were to take all the verbs in the language and organize them into meaningful groups, we could say there would be 2 major groups, or 3 major groups. Regular verbs, irregular verbs, and spelling changing verbs. They change their spelling for some strange reason. In the preterite, there are different types of irregular verbs. And so irregular stem preterites are a subset of irregular verbs in the preterite. And they're called irregular stem preterites precisely because they have an irregular stem. Now that's not the same as a stem changing verb. Remember that stem changing verbs change their stems in the present tense. They change their stems in a consistent way under predictable circumstances. Now, stem changing verbs in the preterite do something slightly different. First of all, AR and ER stem changing verbs don't change their stems in the preterite. Only IR stem changers do, and that's only in the third person, singular and plural. These verbs that we're about to discuss are not stem changing verbs. These verbs are irregular stem preterites, and they change just once. There's one irregular stem. It doesn't change or not change according to the situation. It's just irregular. And there's no way to predict how it's going to change based on the way the verb looks. It's just irregular. But if we group them into the kind of change they make or the kind of difference in their stem, we will have more luck in remembering them if we organize the information. Okay? Before we get to the verbs themselves, we want to remember that these verbs have a unique set of endings, a special set of endings that belongs only to them. These are the only verbs in the preterite that use this blended set of endings. Okay, I call it a blended set. Do you remember why I call it a blended set of endings? Joni, you're nodding. Can you tell us?
Because it like blends the AR and ER and IR all together.
Right. Some of the endings are AR endings. In fact, 2 of them are AR verb endings from the preterite, and the other 4 are ER-IR verb endings from the preterite. So in case you are lost, you don't remember this, I think your textbook actually, it doesn't actually tell you even what they are. All right, so let's review them, that blended set of endings. I did put a chart in your book or in your notes for you. The blended set of endings. Yo. Tú, iste, él, usted, o, nosotros, imos, vosotros, istes, ellos, ellas, ustedes, hieron. Now, here's where we're getting back to that point that John was just illustrating for us. This and this, that A and O, are consistent with AR verb endings in the preterite with one notable exception. What's the difference? No accent marks. In fact, no irregular verb in the preterite has an accent mark. They don't use them. Okay? And then the other forms that we have, all of the other four, are consistent with ER and IR verb endings. Okay? Note, and this is kind of interesting, and I can't explain why, but I'm one of those people that just likes to turn ideas over in her mind. Note that it's the two forms that typically do have an accent mark in the preterite are the ones that they use the AR endings for. I don't know why. Is that a happy coincidence? Or is it a coincidence? Or was that intentional because of the way it normally works? I don't know. Well then, in that question then below the table, what differentiates these endings from the regular preterite tense endings? Number one, it's a blend. Number two, there aren't any accent marks. So both of those things should be written in that area. Then next you have the table. And you'll notice that there are more verbs in my table in the notes document than are in your textbook. In your textbook there are 9. And in my table, there are 14, I think, 14. And that's because I believe if we're going to learn them, we might as well learn them all together. Because in my experience, we will remember better if we know all of them together. Okay, they're consistent. So I hope that you remember these wacky stems. Your textbook gives you some of them, but let's write them down together to make sure. So you notice that in your table, you have 2 columns to fill in. You have the infinitive that I've listed for you. Then you have the meaning, and then you have the new root or the new stem. All right? So let's just review all of that. Estar, clase, significado. Oh, en el pretérito, claro. To be, pero was en el pretérito. Y en la nueva raíz, clase, estub. Estub. Y el segundo verbo, andar. Clase, significado. Oh, walked. Walked. Maybe I should write these infinitives too. Walked. Y en la nueva raíz, andub. Y entonces tener en el significado, had. Y because it's the preterite, got. Okay. Y la nueva raíz, to. Now, you can see why I've organized them together. You notice that your textbook only gives you 2 of those 3 and doesn't put them together. Why not? Does it not make sense to you to organize them together? I call these the UV stems, crazily enough, because they have UV in them, right? And then you just add that blended set of endings. Estuve, estuviste, estuvo, estuvimos, estuvistes, estuvieron. Okay. Now you notice that on your note sheet, I have 3 that are shaded, then I have 3 that are white, 3 that are shaded, and then 5 that are white. That's because they belong together in a group. Okay, they're going to behave in a similar fashion. So the next, I'm going to switch colors on the board. I hope that those who are watching this or listening to this at home can see the other colors that I'm using. So poder, the next set of three, poder, poner, and saber, right? Is that what's there?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, so poder, significado, could, poner, put, saber, found out. Muy bien. And now poder, la nueva raíz, clase, pooed. It sounds like something you did in your pants when you were little. You pooed, right? Pooed. I taught pooed tat. You know, that's that Sylvester and Tweety, right? You don't even know those cartoons. Wow, am I old and you're young? Because Sylvester and Tweety, Sylvester's the big black and white cat, and Tweety's the little bird in the cage. And the little bird always outsmarts the big cat. And the cat always says, I taught pooty tat. Okay. Wow. That's a blast from the past. Okay. Pude, pudiste, pudo, pudimos, pudistes, pudiero. Poner, the new stem. Pus. Now, students, boys especially, always blush a little bit when we say the yo form. So, let's get it out of our system, because this is Spanish, this is not English. But for some reason, you all giggle and blush when we say the yo form of this verb in the preterite. Here we go. Clase yo. Puse. Repitan, por favor, puse. Puse, puse. Puse, puse, puse. See? You can't do it because you're thinking with your English brain. Leave the English brain behind.
Disgusting, Sean.
Leave your English brain behind, okay? And get over it. Just get over it, okay? Now, saber, en el pretérito, nueva raíz, sup. Sup. Supe, supiste, supo, supimos, supiste, supieron. Okay? Nice. All right, so the next set of three, venir, querer, and hacer. Okay, so, en el pretérito, venir, venir, no, en el pretérito, came. Again, some of you have a hard time with that. Came, querer. Well, wanted is the imperfect tense, but querer in the preterite changes its meaning slightly to tried to, or if it's negative, it means refused. It changes its meaning slightly in the preterite. It's new, hacer in the preterite. Made or did. Made or did. Ahora, la nueva raíz. Venir, been. Querer, quis. Hacer, is, H-I-C. But now there's a caveat, right? Because when you get to the L-A usted form, if you don't change that C, you get eco. But we want it to be iso because we want it to mirror the sound of the infinitive. So we change the spelling to a Z, iso, in the L-A usted form of that verb. All right, are you still with me?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we have 5 verbs here at the end, and I want you to know that they do a similar thing. Remember, the first 3 were my UV stems. The second 3 were my U stems. That makes sense to us. The next 3 are the I stems. That makes sense. And then we have this last group, and I call these the J stems because all of these verbs end up with a J in their stem And because of that J and the way it's pronounced, we're going to have another issue in the EOS-ASU studies form. Okay? So, decir, tell me what the infinitives are. Can I erase what's here already?
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't want to get this out of where our viewers, the ones who are viewing this at home, can see what I'm writing. So the first verb in that group is decir. Tell me what the infinitives are. Decir,
Traer.
traer. The next one,
Conducir.
conducir,
Producir.
producir,
Traducir.
traducir. Now these are the only ones I put on there. But if you had a verb that ended in ducir, could you see it's going to behave the same way? Okay, these are the most common ones. So the meanings in the preterite, decir, said or told. Traer, brought. Conducir, drove. Producir, produced. And traducir, translated. Come on, I hear you traduce all it. Okay. Translated. And now we need to talk about those new stems. Okay, yes.
I have a quick question about conducir. Would that also be used in like drove away? Like if you're
No, that would be, no. But, by the way, conducir also means to conduct. Okay? Do you understand that to drive is related to conduct? Sure, makes sense. All right. So, the new stems for these, decir, D-I-J. Traer, tra, T-R-A-J. Conducir,
Conducir.
condu. Producir, produ. And traducir, tradu. Now, the one thing that's unusual about these, and I left a note for you that explains why there's an asterisk in that cell for the new stem. These verbs also take out the I from the ending of the last form. So in EOS-AS ustedes, instead of being I-E-R-O-N, like all the other verbs, it's going to be E-R-O-N. Okay? Just E-R-O-N. Questions about that page of notes? Okay. Serenier and the preterite. The beautiful thing about serenier is very efficient. They're identical. And you just know which one it is based on the context of the sentence. For example, fui a una fiesta de Super Bowl. Okay? I went to a Super Bowl party. How do I know I went to a Super Bowl party? Because it'd be unusual to say I was a Super Bowl party. Now, I'm entertaining. I'm a lot of fun. But I don't think I could be a party by myself, right? So it depends on the sentence. By the context, you would know whether it was ser or ir. Now, there are other verbs, and we just talked about them a little bit, that change their meaning slightly in the preterite. Conocer means to know. In the preterite, it means met. Saber in the present means to know, but in the preterite means found out. Querer in the present means to want, but in the preterite means try to. And then no querer in the present means doesn't want, but in the preterite means refused to. And we talked about most of those a couple minutes ago. Now, the next grammar box, they have titled say plus indirect object pronouns. Now, I call it something different. I call this unintentional events or accidents. Now, this is a beautiful piece of grammar, and as a teacher, this is one of those structures that I love the most because I think it reveals a cultural attitude about the way we talk about something often reveals our attitude toward the event. So here we go. It says, use this formula to compose sentences which describe unintentional events. And that formula is on page 162, the first item in the box. So we're going to use say plus an indirect object pronoun plus a verb. Now, because we're talking about unintentional events, because we're talking about accidents, we're primarily going to use the preterite in this lesson. That doesn't mean you can't use it in other tenses. It just means that in this lesson, when we're explaining what happened, it naturally means we're going to use the preterite. So, before we go on to say what does change, what doesn't change, and fill in the rest of those notes, why do I call it unintentional events? Okay, so in English, if we went to make something like pudding that requires milk, and we got everything else going on, and we go to the refrigerator, and there isn't any milk in there. In English, we tend to say, I ran out of milk. We take responsibility for it. We say, I ran out of milk. In Spanish, they say, the milk ran out on me. I'm not responsible for it. It's the milk's fault. The milk ran out on me. If there's a tray of glasses and I'm walking, from the kitchen to the dining room and I trip over, the dog, which could happen to my husband. The dog will not leave me alone. And I tip the tray and all the glasses fall to the floor. Instead of saying I broke all the glasses, in Spanish I would say the glasses broke themselves on me. The glasses jumped off the tray and broke themselves on me. It's their fault, not mine. I hope so.
So would it be like the same way? Like I didn't forget to do the homework forgot.
The homework forgot itself to me. And when we're talking, you had this before. In Spanish, 2 or 3, I don't remember which, where you left your keys at home.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, yes.
Se me olvidó por completo la tarea. Se me olvidaron por completo las llaves. It's the same structure. It's not your fault that it happened. It's the inanimate object did it to you. And I love this cultural attitude. I don't have to be responsible for my own actions. So, the say never changes. It's always going to be say. Because it's an inanimate object that's happening to you, and it could be singular or plural, that's why it's say. All right? The indirect object represents the person the event happened to. Again, when we were in that previous chapter, I think it was Spanish 2, but I can't remember. Or Spanish 3? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Spanish 3. It was always say may. But in this lesson, if we're explaining that it happened to someone else, it was say lay. Okay? Could be say nos if it happened to us. And number 3, the verb agrees with the object involved and is always in the preterite in this lesson. We talked a little bit about how it could be, Tom eats breakfast before me, he has his cereal, and I go to get the milk out of the fridge and there isn't any there. The milk always runs out on me. It's not Tom always uses up all the milk. Okay, that could be the present tense. Okay, so what tense or tenses is this structure used? Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Is always in the, it's not preterite there, I'm sorry. It's always in the third person, singular or plural. I'm sorry, that's my fault. So that line there, number 3, The verb agrees with the object being used and is always in the third person, singular or plural, depending on whether that object is singular or plural. Yes, sir.
What's number one?
The say never changes. Number one, the say never changes. So what tense or tenses is this structure used in? In this lesson, it's probably primarily going to be the preterite. But it could be used in any tense, depending on how it's being used. It will be rarer in some tenses than in others. But if we're explaining why something happened, then giving an excuse, it's generally going to be in the preterite. And then there's some room there for you to write some examples. And then on the next page, there's a table where you can fill in verbs commonly used in this structure. And you have a list of them in point number 2 on page 162. Quedar, quemar, perder, olvidar, caer, romper, and acabar. That makes sense in this lesson because we're explaining what was going on. All right, so you need to know those infinitives and what they mean, and by extension, because we're going to use them in this structure, how to conjugate them in the preterite. Okay, how to conjugate them in the preterite. Now, we have very little time left. But I want to go on and look at that last box together. It's kind of, well, it's easy in one aspect and there's a challenge in another aspect. Not that you're not up to the challenge, because you are. You're brilliant. You can do this. But the past progressive is the imperfect version of the present progressive. Instead of it telling what is happening, it's used to tell what was happening. It's used to tell what was happening. It's used to describe past action in progress. So I was carrying glasses into the dining room when I tripped over the dog and the glasses fell on me. Okay? So it talks about action, past action that was in progress, and it tells what was happening. For formation, you use an imperfect tense form of a star, an imperfect tense form of a star, plus the present participle. So, the formation of the present participle for AR verbs, clase, ando, A-N-D-O. For ER-IR verbs, iendo. And remember, this is the, in English, the English equivalent is the ing form of a verb. And then we have some table there for a star and the imperfect. Let's go through it quickly. Clase, yo, estaba, tú, estabas, él, usted, estaba, nosotros, estábamos, and there's an accent mark over that first A, and estábamos. Vosotros, estabais, ellos, ellas, ustedes, estaban. And can verbs other than estar be used? Andar and seguir, right? Because we just learned them to use with the present progressive. So we can also use them with the past progressive, and we're going to conjugate those verbs in the imperfect tense. So you might want to jot down how to conjugate those two verbs in the imperfect as well. Now, next page. What's the result when using the past progressive and the preterite in the same sentence? Well, this is on page 164, point number 2. When the past progressive and the preterite are used in the same sentence, the past progressive describes an action in progress, and the preterite describes completed actions or interrupting events within that setting. So, I was walking from the kitchen into the dining room, and I tripped over the dog, completed action, and the glasses fell on me, completed action. Okay? Yes.
We kind of use this when we did the boy, or like bear.
Iba, yeah. We did kind of use this same thing. It's the same concept. Thanks, Jonah, for reminding me. It is the same concept when you were using Iba, blank, but. Remember that? Well, this is the same thing. We're going to use the past progressive to paint the scene, and then the preterite to tell what happened on that background. That's not a new concept to us, but it's just a good reminder of that relationship between the past or the imperfect tense and the preterite tense. Now, when shouldn't, and I left you room for examples, then when shouldn't you use the past progressive? When shouldn't you use the past progressive? According to the text, point number 3, we shouldn't use the past progressive to talk about ongoing, habitual.
Rather than progress.
Okay, you don't use the past progressive to talk about ongoing or habitual actions, but instead you use the imperfect tense, just the plain old imperfect for that. But you reserve the past progressive to talk about action that was in progress at a specific time in the past. Okay? Now, that was really a quick overview, and I know it. You know it because you were furiously writing today. I'm going to be out tomorrow. We talked about that. I never worry about you because you treat me so well that I know that you're going to treat a sub well too. But be sure to be on task. Make sure you do what you need to do tomorrow.
Students have the right to feel physically and emotionally safe. Congratulations to the casting crew of Cinderella for an awesome performance this weekend. Juniors, tomorrow is your SAT practice. Please report to your assigned testing room. There will be signs in the morning directing you where to go. You will need pencils, a calculator, and a good night's rest and a nice breakfast tomorrow to help get you started for your testing. Remember, students, if you need to ride the late bus, you must sign up with the office before noon of the same day. You must also have a bus pass